Andriano bludgeoned her 33-year-old husband to death with a bar stool and then slit his throat.
911, what is your emergency?
My husband tried to kill me. He tried to strangle me and I hit him, and then I tried to call 911, and then I didn't want to get involved, and so I stopped, and then he started being mad at me and then tried to take off after me again, and I hit him again.
Behind closed doors, Andriano harbored had resentment towards her terminally sick husband and yearned to be away from him, despite her outward appearances as a loving mother to their 2 children and a devoted wife to Joe. Wendi Andriano was raised in a deeply devout family and was born on August 6, 1970. She had quite a difficult time while growing up because her family had to travel frequently for the ministry. But Wendi was still a standout student, despite everything. She talked of having a very strict upbringing and once claimed that her father had sexually abused her. However, when questioned about the incident, she said she could not recall it, leaving others wondering if this was actually happening or if it was just a mere dream. After Wendi married Joseph Andriano in January 1994, the couple moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where they raised 2 children. However, Joe became seriously ill 4 years into his marriage and made an unsuccessful attempt to recover himself through holistic therapy. In 1998, following 3 surgical procedures to attempt excision of a recurrent tumor in his salivary gland and several false positives, Joe was ultimately identified as having metastatic adenoid cystic carcinoma. Now that the illness had progressed to his lungs and there was no chance left for him, Dean decided to undergo chemotherapy in 2000. But Joe's health did not get better, so Wendi had to take on the role of carer in addition to her work as a flat manager. However, Wendi soon started to feel resentful of her new duties. She believed that this was not the life and marriage she had committed to. She wanted a different life because at 30, she was still a young woman and had to take care of her ailing husband in addition to her 2 little children. With time, Wendi started going out to bars once a week and started having a lot of affairs. In the summer of 2000, Wendi became romantically involved with a man named Rick, who resided in the apartment complex where she worked as the manager of the unit. Rick, however, was unaware that Wendi was married and had 2 kids. As a result, he broke up with Wendi after learning of it, but Wendi was upset and once went after Rick quite hard. She allegedly spent 5 minutes knocking on his door while she waited outside his apartment in the middle of the night, demanding to be allowed inside. When he refused, she allegedly threatened to go acquire the master passkey so that she could enter his property on her own. In several bars that summer, Wendi was observed dancing, making out with males, and even sharing a kiss. Joe, however, received his 4th round of chemotherapy on September 27th. That same evening, Wendi went to a dance club where she saw a man and initiated a kiss. Apparently, she then brought the man from the club home and had sex with him. Wendi told the man, falsely, over the phone the next day, that her husband had passed away from cancer. During one of Joe's hospital visits, Wendi also asked her ex-lover Rick if he might pretend to be her spouse. They could obtain insurance on Joe's life if they could demonstrate that he was in good health. And why would Wendi do such a thing? But Rick turned down Wendi's $10,000 offer to complete this task. Wendi made multiple attempts during the remainder of the year to secure insurance on Joe's life from different firms. There was contradicting information, so it was unknown if Joe was aware of this, or even if he was in on it. But one thing was certain, Wendi was determined to obtain this life insurance policy and would stop at nothing to do so. Wendi asserted that Joe didn't have cancer during one insurance company pre-screening procedure, and in September, Joe received a call from a different company that claimed to have received Joe's electronic pre-application. In response, Joe told them he wasn't interested in applying. However, 3 days later, Wendi replied to their email from her personal account, requesting that Joe's request be granted and that any future correspondence be directed to her directly, rather than through Joe. She tried asking someone else to appear to be Joe once more. This time, she offered to pay 2 men $50,000 each to act as Joe at a life insurance physical examination, but they both turned her down. Wendi was getting increasingly irritated and agitated over this, and she could never obtain her life insurance coverage. Wendi's thoughts descended into a dark place as a result of her mounting animosity towards Joe and her belief that he would have passed away by now. She decided to take it upon herself to shorten Joe's life and get rid of him as soon as possible. What could possibly be the reason for Wendi to be so desperate for money?
What is your emergency?
My husband's not feeling well. He's kind of turning blue. He vomited on the floor. He says he feels like he's having a heart attack.
Wendi Joe went to a friend's house on October 7, 2000, with their 2 little children to attend a cookout. At around midnight, they made their way back to their flat and put the kids to bed. On October 8th, at approximately 2:15 a.m., Wendi gave a call to a co-worker of hers named Chris, who also resided in the same apartment building. Since Joe didn't seem to be in good health, Wendi asked Chris if he could keep the kids around their flat while she took Joe to the doctor. Wendi approached Chris outside the flat when she got there and said, "I have a problem. My husband is on the floor dying, and I haven't phoned 911 yet. He is unaware that I haven't done so. Please don't ask any questions." Chris encouraged Wendi to phone 911, seemingly perplexed as to why she hadn't done so already. Wendi entered the flat again, and Chris trailed after. She eventually moved into another room and dialed 911 to request assistance. Chris entered the flat and discovered Joe in the fetal position on the floor of the living room. Even so, Chris could see that Joe was struggling to breathe, looked extremely weak, and had just puked. Joe summoned the strength to ask Chris for assistance as soon as he reached him. He added that he had needed assistance for a while and questioned why it was taking the paramedics more than 45 minutes to come. Wendi came back into the living room, and because the ambulance was on their way to another call, she asked Chris if she could take Joe to the hospital herself using his car. In addition, Wendi made an effort to help Joe get up because he was too weak to do so alone. But when she couldn't do that, Wendi lost it and started yelling at Joe, calling him names. When Chris heard sirens approaching from outside the flat, he went outside to direct them and to signal for help. When the paramedics were gathering their equipment, Wendi yelled at them to get out of her flat. She ran back inside, slamming the door behind her. Surprisingly, Wendi's response startled Chris and the 4 paramedics, who knocked on the flat door in an attempt to find an explanation. The paramedics knocked for 5 to 10 minutes before calling the alarm room of the Phoenix Fire Department. Then the alarm room tried calling Wendi's house to persuade her to open the front door. Once the alarm room had successfully communicated with Wendi, the paramedics were informed that she was coming outside to speak with them after a short while. However, Wendi chose to exit through her back door, climb over the back patio wall, and then walk around the apartment building to the front door where Chris and the paramedics were waiting. Suspiciously, Wendi's wet hair and new clothing, which she had changed since their last meeting, raised suspicions. Joe had a do not resuscitate order, and Wendi informed the paramedics that he was dying of cancer. She further added that the paramedics had no choice but to leave without going inside the flat or seeing Joe, because this was not how he wanted to proceed. After calling 911 again an hour or so later at 3:39 a.m., Wendi was inconsolable and said that Joe had attacked her and that she had retaliated by hitting him in self-defense. The same paramedics who had arrived earlier observed Wendi standing outside the apartment, chatting to a police officer while donning a bloodied t-shirt. Joe was found unconscious and covered in blood on the floor of the flat when the paramedics arrived. He had cuts on his skull that revealed some brain matter, as well as a deep stab wound on the left side of his neck. Consequently, bloody pillows, a kitchen knife with blood on the sharp side, a shattered bar stool covered in blood, and bits of a lamp were discovered close to Joe's body. Everyone was curious as to what had truly transpired because the crime scene appeared to be extremely gruesome. Was this true? What had really happened that fateful night? Did Wendi really act in self-defense? Or had her patience worn thin and she decided to take matters into her own hands and brutally murder her husband?
911, what is your emergency? My husband tried to kill me. He tried to strangle me and I hit him, and then I tried to call 911, and then I didn't want to get involved, and so I stopped, and then he started being mad at me and then tried to take off after me again, and I hit him again.
Wendi stated that she was trying to help Joe terminate his life that evening when they both became afraid and made the decision to seek assistance. She stated that after calling 911 and Chris leaving the flats to meet the paramedics, Joe decided to carry out the plan. According to Wendi, once the paramedics left, she confessed to Joe that she had had an affair. Joe then turned aggressive and attempted to strangle her with the phone cord, but she managed to get a knife, cut the cord, and escape. Joe leaned over to pick up the knife when she set it down and declared he was going to commit suicide. She struck him with the bar stool to get him to stop. During the battle, she said, her hand fell off the knife and all of a sudden, blood was everywhere. She denied the claims that she had stabbed Joe and that Joe had ultimately cut his own throat. Although Wendi initially avoided suspicion, the inconsistencies in her statement were too much for the investigators to overlook. As they looked more, they found startling information that gave a different impression of the grieving widow she was portraying. In addition, police examined Wendi's most recent internet searches and found that, only a few days before the murder, Wendi had sought up fatal dosages of prescription medications. Also, in an additional examination of Wendi's storage unit, they found an open cardboard shipping box that had 2 Tupperware containers filled with sodium azide, 9 Q-tips, a plastic knife and fork, 2 pairs of latex gloves, and a 500-gram bottle of the chemical. However, several of these items have Wendi's fingerprints on them. Furthermore, when investigators went through Wendi and Joe's flat, they discovered sodium azide-filled gelatin capsules in a bottle labeled for herbal supplements. Also, trace amounts of sodium azide were found in 2 soup bowls and a pot in the kitchen. Altogether, 20.8 grams of sodium azide cannot be explained. But trace amounts of it were discovered in Joe's stomach contents and blood. In the days before October 8th, police believed Wendi might have attempted to poison Joe. Furthermore, the autopsy revealed that Joe had suffered cerebral hemorrhaging from no less than 23 hits to the back of his skull, 8 or 10 of which on their own might have knocked Joe out. Defense wounds appeared on Joe's hands and wrists, suggesting that he was aware of the attack for a portion of it. Joe also sustained a 3 3/4 inch long by 2 inch wide knife wound to the left side of his neck, severing an artery and going all the way to his spine. Plus, the medical examiner found that Joe was probably unconscious when stabbed and that the blows to his head happened before the knife cut to his neck, contradicting Wendi's allegation that he could have done it alone. Meanwhile, the blood spatter at the crime scene further demonstrated that Joe was not moving during the attack and was lying down when he was hit. Regretfully, the investigators realized that Wendi's version of events on that fateful night was wildly inaccurate and that this had been a vicious crime. Joe had been subjected to such a vicious attack, and Wendi was clearly lying. Given the mounting evidence against her, she was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Wendi's murder trial started on August 23, 2004, 4 years after the crime, and although she had no previous criminal record, she was facing the death penalty. With the help of phone records, internet searches, and the testimony of friends and relatives who exposed her callous actions following Joe's death, the prosecution put together a strong case against her. In addition, they presented proof of Wendi's extramarital affairs, which demonstrated her motivation for killing her husband to pursue other relationships. Furthermore, they presented proof of Wendi's efforts to secure life insurance for Joe. It proved that she had planned, known, and intended to kill Joe. It also demonstrated that she had premeditated Joe's murder, even if she had been unable to procure any. Notably, the prosecution claimed that she was drawn in by the possibility of a sizable payout from a medical malpractice suit brought against Joe's physicians. To make it seem as though Joe's death was caused by a heart attack, they tried to demonstrate that Wendi poisoned her husband with the chemical sodium azide. In February 2000, Wendi's hairdresser stated in court that she would have divorced Joe if he wasn't sick. During a subsequent trip to her hair salon, Wendi said that although Joe desired to maintain the marriage, she was emotionally detached from him and desired his death to enable her to move on with her life. During an August visit to the hair salon, Wendi confided in her that she was eyeing another man, but he was reluctant to approach her since she was already married. On the other hand, the defense sought to establish the fact that Wendi was a victim of domestic abuse and that she had killed her violent husband brutally in self-defense. Wendi testified in her own defense throughout the trial, spending 9 days on the witness stand and stating that her husband had abused her. It was that fateful night, she claimed, when she told Joe about her affair and he became enraged, leading to a struggle with the knife and a battle in which she struck Joe with a bar stool in self-defense, following a failed attempt to assist him end his own life. She claimed that during the struggle, Joe had finally slit his own throat and her hand had slipped off the knife. In their closing argument, the defense claimed that Joe had killed himself that evening and that Wendi was a victim of domestic abuse who had acted in self-defense. Following a tense trial, the jury finally returned a guilty judgment on November 18, 2004, finding Wendi Elizabeth Andriano guilty of first-degree murder. Because of the heinousness, cruelty, and depravity of the crime, her devious web of lies finally caught up with her, and a month later, she was sentenced to death by lethal injection.
Are Wendi Andriano and Shauna Ford. Andriano bludgeoned her 33-year-old husband to death with a bar stool and then slit his throat. The medical examiner also found a pesticide in his system.
Wendi appealed her conviction in 2007 on the grounds that the jury had been unfairly prejudiced against her because of information pertaining to her affairs and attempts to purchase life insurance policies for her husband. In July of 2007, the Arizona Supreme Court upheld her conviction, despite her claims that jurors were improperly denied the opportunity to consider lesser counts like second-degree murder or manslaughter. Wendi was granted post-conviction relief in her case once her direct appeal was concluded. Her defense team contended that prosecutor Juan Martinez had unjustly influenced the jury's verdict by using every chance to introduce inadmissible evidence concerning her partying and man-chasing during the trial. However, the Arizona Supreme Court dismissed the claims. Wendi is one of the 3 women on execution row in Arizona who is still there today after continuous legal challenges. The others are Shauna Ford and Samantha Allen. It seems that Wendi did such horrible things to her dying spouse. Wendi was obviously the abuser in this case, not poor Joe, based on the actions she took to end his life. They are horrible. He was obviously being mistreated by the woman who was meant to love and care for him. In his time of need, she utterly ignored him, pushed him aside, and plotted his death. Wendi felt Joe was dying too slowly, and she wanted to be free of him. She will spend the rest of her life in prison as a result of her deception and selfishness. There are times when people suffer for other people's wrong decisions and selfish desires. Check out this video on what lesbian lovers are willing to do to keep their secret. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share, and comment. See you in our next video.